All right, so when you are creating your grid, you've already done all of the math to make sure that your photograph and your paper are at the same aspect ratio. So if you were doing, let's say, a square picture, square photograph, you can't transfer it to a rectangular piece of paper. Your paper would also need to be square. Okay, so you want to just make sure that your aspect ratio is correct. You can look up lists on Google to kind of see if your photograph and your paper are in the same aspect ratio. Um, you're going to transfer the exact same amount of squares. So if your grid on your photograph is 9 by 12, it's 9 squares across and 12 squares down. I've got my paper turned so it fits here. You're going to want to add the exact same number of squares. You don't want to add fewer and you don't want to add more. If you add fewer, you're going to cut off your photograph, right? If you add less, you're going to have extra paper, which honestly that wouldn't be too bad, but you'd still want to make sure that everything is still square. So when it comes to creating the actual grid, I like to keep things pretty simple and deal with whole numbers only. That way I'm not having to do a lot of math of like, okay, 1.5 inch squares, that's this, then this. And it just makes your life easier if you can deal with whole numbers. So 1 inch squares, 2 inch squares, 3, 4, so on and so forth. You can do like 1/2 inch squares, 3/4 inch squares. Your grid can be a grid can be any size, but to make your life super simple, keep it with whole numbers. It makes your life easier. If you have a light pencil, like a 5H or a 3H, an H numbered pencil, that's going to be good because eventually you want this grid to disappear. You don't want anyone to know that you were working with a grid. You can also use a number 2 pencil. Just use it super light. You don't want to press super hard into it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the 0 on my ruler, and mine is right here. Some rulers, the very end is the 0, but this one, it's right there. So I don't want to line up the edge with my paper. I want to line up that 0 right there. Okay, and I'm going to move it really close to the top. Zoom out here a bit. I'm going to move it right up against the top, pretty close, and I'll know that my ruler is straight across if I can look at this little strip of paper and it's roughly, if not exactly, the same width, right? So if it's tilted, you can see that little strip, it's thinner here, and then it gets wider over here. And if it's tilted the other way, it's now thicker over here, thinner here. So we want that little band to be as close to as a consistent size. No need to measure it, just kind of eyeball it. But I'm going to make a little mark at every inch because I was working with a 9 by 12 grid, and this is 9 by 12 paper. So that means every square is going to be 1 inch. Now, I've come to the end of my paper. It's not quite at 12, right? It's just shy of 12. That is okay. That is perfectly okay if it's just shy of that number or just a little bit over, right? So like if it were, like there's my 12, it's right there, and I've got this little bit of paper left. Just let that be the end of it, okay? Your grid, your squares around the edge, the frame of your paper, they don't really matter. They don't really matter at all, right? It's these central ones that we want nice and square to keep any distortion from happening. So I made my little tick marks. I'm going to move my ruler straight down. Straight down. Don't turn your paper around. Don't turn your paper around. It will not line up. Your lines will be slanted. It will not work. Okay? So keep your paper the same way. Move that ruler straight down. And you can move that ruler below your paper. Or if you want, if you've got a clear ruler, you can move it above it just a little bit. And we've got that strip again. And so we'd want to make sure that strip is consistently, fairly similar all the way across, not slanted or anything. But I find it easy to just kind of line it up with the edge of the paper because the edge of your paper is straight. Line up that 0. and I'm going to make that mark again. And with this, I want to make sure I've got a nice secure hold on my paper and my ruler. So you may need to move along the way. Move your hand, so stop, hold it, move across. And if you do move it, line it back up with your tick marks, right? So again, I'm just making a mark at every inch. I'm just shy of 12, so this square, this row right here, or it's a column right now, but it will be a row. It's going to be a little bit thinner, but that's okay. All right, so now we're going to do the same thing. I've turned my paper 90 degrees. I'm going to do the exact same thing. Line up that 0 with the edge of my paper. Make sure that that band is fairly similar in width all the way across. And I'm doing a tick mark at every inch. Again, depending on what you're doing with the size of your paper and your photograph, you're going to have to do a little bit of math to figure out how many squares and whatnot. So I made my marks. I'm going to move my ruler straight down again. I'm not turning my paper around. I'm moving it straight down. And this time I'm actually going to put my ruler on top of my paper. That's just me. It makes it a little bit easier. And I'm making a mark at every inch. Do your math twice, then do this. There's nothing worse than doing your grid and then realizing, oh no, I messed up my math and all my grid, like my grid is wrong. Okay, so we have our tick marks all around the edges. Now the thing is to connect these dots. Okay, so we could spend a lot of time trying to line these up just like this. I find it much easier to put my pencil down on one of my tick marks, place it there pretty firmly, and then I can use that, my pencil, I can use it like a pivot for my ruler, right? If I'm not pressing super hard on my ruler. So now I can rotate it until the edge of my ruler hits that first mark. And now I've got it really firm. You see I've got my fingers spread out. My dots are lined up by my ruler. I'm going to press firmly against my ruler. Firmly and lightly at the same time, because I don't want to make a super dark line. Because eventually that grid, it's going to disappear. We want it to kind of fade away. So now on to my next one. I'm going to place my pencil on my next mark. Press my ruler up against that line, rotate it till I line up. Do a little check. They're lined up. Press my pencil against my ruler and lightly just drag it down. Okay. It may be hard to see here. It stands out pretty well for me. We don't have to see this grid from across the room. It just has to be light enough for us to see it. Place your pencil, ruler up against it, pivot till you hit the mark, double check to make sure it's all lined up, pencil against the ruler, very light line. And we're just going to continue that all the way down. So I'm going to do this side, and then I will show you guys the longer edge. All right, so I finished my lines for the shorter ends of my paper, right, for the shorter width. Now it's time to do the longer ones. And these down here, they got a little bit darker. This is about as dark as you would ever want to go. You want them to be super duper duper light. Okay, so it's going to be the same process. We're just going to line it up, place my pencil on the mark, line up my ruler, and pivot it until I hit that mark towards the bottom. Okay, now if you're in a situation where you have a shorter ruler, or maybe you're working with bigger paper, you know, your ruler is not long enough to quite reach both ends, this is what you need to do. You need to pick one of your lines towards the center of your paper. Do that step that we first did, right? Line up that 0 on the edge, make sure it's going across straight there, and we have a line that does that. Add a little tick mark at every inch. That way we don't have to guess if my ruler isn't reaching, right? So if I know that my ruler is only going to reach this part of my paper, if I had a shorter ruler, I don't have to guess like, oh, am I going straight down? Am I going to connect with the line? Am I going to connect with that other mark? No. We can place it there. and I have this mark right here that I can line it up with. Okay, and if my ruler goes past that mark, I just take it down almost to the end of the ruler, and then I move the ruler further down, place your pencil where those lines intersect, right? And line it up again with the bottom. And that's if you have a shorter ruler, right? So if your ruler doesn't reach both ends of your paper, that's what you would do. And you would do the same thing the other way. You would just have to have one set of lines first, okay? So then I'm just going to continue that. Luckily, this ruler is long enough to go to both ends, so I just place my pencil on my mark, press that ruler up against it, rotate until I hit the other mark, move my pencil out of the way, do a little bit of double check, see that those lines or those marks are connected with my ruler, straight down, super light. Place your pencil on your mark, line up your ruler on your pencil, pivot it to your next mark on the other end of the paper, double check, super light line. Pencil on your mark, ruler on your pencil, rotate till you hit your other tick mark on the other end, double check, super light line, right? So you're pressing against your ruler, but also lightly pressing down, almost really letting the weight of the pencil do the mark making for you. And it doesn't matter which ones you do first. I would say do the shorter ends of your paper first. That makes life easier, especially if you have that ruler that doesn't reach the other end. And it should look like a bunch of squares. When you look at it, it should look like pixel art or a piece of graph paper. If you're looking at it and you see things like, oh, yeah, there's some squares, and then, oh, wait, there's some not so square shapes, you've messed up. This is an intensive process. I would say take the longest on this. This is like the foundation of a house. This is the foundation of your project, of your grid drawing. Spend a good amount of time on it, because if this is messed up, your drawing will be messed up. Once you've done this, once you've got your grid set up, on the sides, in your first square, lightly put a 1, and going across 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And that could have been on the longer edge. What we're going to do on the longer edge, though, in the same box that has 1, we're going to do a letter A. And then going down, B, C, D, E, F, and so on. H, I, J, K, L. The reason that you want to do numbers and letters is because if you've ever done math, plotting points like coordinates, it's a big oopsie daisy if you switch those numbers, right? But here, like let's say I was looking for square D5. Here's row D, here's square number 5, right? So that's D5. Now let's say, oh, I need 5D. Well, here's the only 5 I have. Here's the only D that I have. It's the exact same square. Whereas if this were, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's say I had numbers going down this way. If I needed 2, 3, it's like, okay, here's 2 and here's 3. Could be that one. Or here's 2 and here's 3. Could be that one, right? So I would say do letters and numbers, not numbers and numbers, not letters and letters. It doesn't matter which goes on which row, right? But 1A, they will share the same box, and pick one to go across, the other way down. I could have done numbers going down or letters going across, but that's how you set up your grid drawing. Again, it's an intensive process, but you are copying a photo. You are literally turning into a human printer. It takes a little bit longer than a printer. So, hope that helps, guys.